Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is Tuesday. It is 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which means it is time for the House of Common show, the flagship show of the House of Common Network. You know the vibes. We're in the building. There are conversations to be had, and there are no better men, dare I say, human beings on the planet to have any sort of conversation about anything than the men on this show. And you, of course, you who are listeners, you who are viewers, but more importantly, us right now, 10 o'clock Tuesday. It's happening right now. You know the vibes. Are you a fan of the show? Please do us a favor. Let your friends know about this show so they can be fans of it too. Tell them to find us on YouTube right here where you are right now. Press the bell, subscribe to it so you know when we're going to be on live. If you're a listener, you're listening to this afterwards, check out the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You know how we gets down. Before I pass the microphone to my brothers and talk a little bit about the rundown, things that have gone on this week, it is important, it is imperative that I put up this jersey.
Ooh.
It is imperative.
Wow.
I want a Raptors jersey.
As a native, for those of you who are listeners and you're not watching right now, I have put up a Montreal Canadiens jersey. Why is that? Because like the Golden State Warriors once did, the Maple Leafs blew a 3-1 lead and gave up the ghost to the Montreal Canadiens, the most important franchise in the National Hockey League. Hold that up again? Dare say otherwise? How many rings do the Maple Leafs have? How many rings do the Habs have?
Can you hold up that jersey again?
I just wanted to make sure to see that.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, your baby jersey.
Hold that.
Whose dog's jersey did you steal?
Listen.
Wow,
you know what? You guys make fun. You know what my son said to me? My son said to me today? He's like, Dad, I know you're going on the TV show. Before I go to sleep, take my jersey.
Stop it.
Please, Dad. Let the people know how
man.
great our team is. Dad, I know it doesn't fit you, but it fits me, and it fits our heart, and it fits who we are as people, Dad. Let the people know that their team is trash.
Do you even watch hockey? Do you even watch hockey?
No, I don't.
Okay, so stop. Next.
This guy said rings.
I'm a Penguins fan, so
you know what the funny thing is? The last time the Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup, there were 6 teams in the league. You better win a Stanley Cup if there are 6
teams in the league. Everybody better have a turn.
Yeah, exactly. I can't count. I can't give. These guys haven't won a Stanley Cup since the league became the league. It's nonsense. But the Leafs.
Again, now remember we had the Warriors joke. The Warriors blew a 3-1 lead.
That's
now
true.
have it in the city of Toronto, land that we love.
That's the problem.
The Leafs blew a 3-1 lead to a legitimately worse team.
I hate
They're
hockey.
not the worst team. They have the
the Habs were a worse team than the Maple Leafs.
A worse scoring team.
They weren't calling them to do anything. Nobody expected the Habs to get anywhere.
No, I thought the Leafs were going to win in 6 games. I did.
Should have won in 4.
But you know what?
Should have won in 5.
It's so good to be proven wrong, boys.
Yo, Chris, can you put that on
3?
Maybe later on. That'll be for our Patreon. That'll be for our Patreon. Gentlemen, really quickly, we're gonna do the rundown less formal. Guys, before we get into our conversation, before I pass it to Stefan, anything that's happened over the course of the week that you want to bring up outside of our main event topics, anything that's happened that you would be like, shoot, man, can you believe this?
Guys, can we talk about? You know what? Never mind.
Just do
it. Oh no, you can't do that now.
Just do it, bro. You can't do that, man. Come on.
Don't you gotta show us your hair.
Okay,
we talk about tired.
Did you guys
tired of the suspense? Okay.
Did you guys see where okay? A couple weeks ago, Demi Lovato came out as non-binary. Did you see where Demi Lovato blamed it on men who held her back from coming out as being non-binary?
I did not see that.
You have with that?
Yeah.
No.
You didn't
Elaborate.
see that? Yeah, that is what Demi Lovato blamed it on for all these years, that the reason they did not come out as non-binary is because men kept holding them back from doing so.
I'm out, man. Noah, get the vote. We out.
Okay.
Next topic.
Then we can talk about the NBA wilding out right now. There have been 5 instances in the last 3 or 4 days of people throwing things at NBA players, attacking, running on the court. It is bedlam. It is insurrectionist. Gentlemen, what are some of your thoughts on what you're seeing in the NBA right now? People thinking that they can just kind of go in there and run roughshod and do whatever they want.
Yo, listen, I was talking to a coworker of mine today, and he put it this way: we're seeing. It's not racism, first of all. I've seen that in a couple, but it's not racism. What I think it is that it's, sorry, no offense, white guys who have had that pent up energy for a long time, sporting events, they're getting all rowdy, they're getting liquored up, and they're just doing wild things in these events. I don't think
Only white people, eh?
Yeah,
Okay.
Stefan, you're on one tonight. Eh?
You're on one, eh?
who dumped the popcorn on Russell.
Black people don't drink and go to sports and
But-
have a good time.
And
No?
get crazy and
But
violent?
hold on, but
And
hold
get
on,
crazy and violent?
but hold on, but hold
Can't
on.
hold
When
the lips.
hold on, but hold
Your fist what?
but hold- but
Where are
hold
you
on.
going with this?
when
Yeah, I
when
wanna know.
listen, as a friend of mine put it, when black people are out in these public spaces, they're very aware, especially in America, very aware that they're in a public place and that the police are around, and you gotta be.
Do you not remember the Rumble in Detroit?
The Malice in the Palace.
At the Palace.
And
Malice in the
but-
Palace.
to be
But that was
fair, Andrew,
Detroit.
it was a white guy who threw a beer
Exactly.
on
Exactly.
an NBA player, and
Right.
then it was yeah.
Yeah,
so
but
like,
then they
yeah.
all went wild. They all went wild.
But it was mostly white
It
on
was,
black crime.
but it was a white person who threw a beer. I'm not disputing that fact, but I'm saying it was started by the other guys.
By the other guy.
That's
What is
all.
wrong with you guys?
That's all I'm saying.
That's an ISO comment, Jay.
Yeah, that's really an ISO. That's ISO.
So then let's take a moment to turn. I know we were talking about as Andrew has this look in his eyes, but in the chat there was the conversation of Black Wall Street and how what ended up happening was 100 years ago today they had what is being put forward within the media at that time and still on a level here, the race riot, which was really more, if you know anything of it, was actually a race massacre within at Tulsa. And I know it's something that Black Wall Street was the symbol of affluence. They would say that there was more wealth in that neighborhood among the black community in the United States than at any time or any area of that time. And it's something that it's like, I hate to put you on the spot, Jay, but can you speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's so interesting because even in American culture, it was a story that many people didn't hear about for a while. Even me, my mother taught history and African American history, and even me going to a black school, I knew about a lot of stuff, but I didn't even hear about it until I got to college. And then after I heard about it, starting to dig and finding out the research, I think even as a matter of fact, there were three planes. It was correct me if I'm wrong, it was either 3 or 4 planes, and 2 of them were owned by the people who lived in Black Wall Street at the time. So Tulsa, just the 2 days of burning down, they're thinking about, reports say there was about 300 people who were massacred, blacks, thrown in mass graves. Pretty much everything was wiped out. So generationally, they completely hated on the blacks who lived in that portion of Tulsa. And now, and Tulsa pretty much hid that for years, but there were obviously stories like many others, other events similar to Rosewood. But I mean, it's sad that it's obviously it's sad and it's terrible this event happened, and it's very common in unfortunate U.S. history. But it's good that the story is getting out, and even the fact that President Biden actually went down to Tulsa and just kind of to talk a little bit more about it. What's crazy to me.
Yeah, sorry, Adam, go ahead.
No, it's cool. What's crazy to me is how it was reported. I was on. I saw this thing pop up from Twitter, and just like a picture of a newspaper, and how one of the reports were like, I think it was like 3 white people killed. You know what I mean? And so in the midst of like hundreds of minorities being massacred, the news of the day are like, oh, these 3 white people got killed in the midst of these riots, in the midst of this thing, and it's insane. Like when you look back to that time,
it kind of shows you like the amount of progress that we've had and we have now. You know what I mean? It's encouraging, but it is good to look back on that and to see like, man, like what could have been of that time, of that period, of those people.
And the thing is too is like that was what we know about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, is one of multiple massacres that took place in the Black community at that time, between late 1800s to the early 19s, where multiple spaces in the United States where there was progress among our people and giving back to society and all these sort of things, and actually being a part of governments. Like at different times, all of these things were eradicated. And so you have the conversation about generational wealth. Well, the reason why there's no generational wealth is because all these things were constantly eradicated. And it's so hard to build from nothing when all these things get taken away from you. So it's great. Like, I agree with you, Adam. It's great to hear, like, it's great that rectification is coming now, but like, it's cost a lot of people. It's cost a lot. And there's people now who were children at the time who are now testifying about the massacre to Congress, and they're having to plead their case as to why this is a bad thing, and people aren't able to kind of recognize it was a bad thing and we need to rectify it and apologize for it and pay it back to these generations of people who have lost so much. I think that's Stefan, I'm gonna pass it to you for one of our main events. I wonder, Stefan, based on that, if we can maybe change the
Order.
Our order.
Well, let's go with the second one, and then we'll see where the conversation leads from there.
Yeah. But it only makes sense as we're talking about Black Wall Street. We're talking about hidden things that were put aside for so long, and now coming to light. This past week, we learned some terrible news that came out of Kamloops, BC, with regards to children in residential schools. So with that being said, I'll pass the mic over to you.
Yeah. So this past week, news broke. I think it was late last week. At the end of the week, news broke that 215 bodies of children were recovered. They found the remains at a former residential school in Kamloops, I believe it was Kamloops, BC, in the southern interior there. And this really, it's crazy to think, like, the last residential school in this country closed in 1996, right? We think of like 1996 Olympics, Atlanta Olympics, Donovan Bailey, right? Like, we remember these things. I remember like 1996 was a cool year, right? We beat the Americans in the Olympics, and so that is how recent the last residential school was. I think this residential school specifically closed in 1969, but like, we are not removed from residential schools here in this country. It is a recent history, right? And using the word history doesn't even sound like history. History usually connotates like a long time ago. This is recent. This is like, we know where we were in 96. And so, guys, when you heard about this and you saw just the reports coming out, what were your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I was very much shocked. It's one of those things where you understand some of the history, but it's been a while since it's been top of mind like this and so relevant in our news feeds. And then, like you said, Stefan, you see the proximity of how close it is to current events, to current day. The first thing I legit thought was, well, are they going to go back and dig up every other previous location of a residential school? Because if it's at one, it's probably at a multiples. And there is this atonement that is never been fully done from the Canadians, from everyone who lives here. I feel like we are on our way, in the sense of we're talking about these issues a lot more and a lot more openly. I also think back to 2000 and I forget when Justin Trudeau came into office, where he had this reconciliation platform that he was running on, and people criticized him for not doing enough about it. But he made a lot of faith because he understood the PR behind it. He understood what people wanted to hear. I think the nation of Canada is ready to have real conversations of reconciliation. And we live in a world now where this stuff, you can't hide it. Something has to be said, something has to be done. And, you know, a lot of times Canadians love to look down at the southern border and kind of be like, well, we ain't you. And I'm like, no. Yeah. We got to check the plank of wood in our own eye right now, because there's a lot of things that we get, we feel superior to because we say it in, we say it with, like, you know, passive aggressiveness and with certain looks and glances, but we don't actually say it outwardly. And America, if anything, is just more upfront with its racism, but it doesn't mean that it's not the same spirit that lives here in Canada.
Right.
And the massacre and really a genocide of a people group, there has to be a for real response if we're going to start taking steps forward. Like, I know this country wants to, but we have to put that into actionable steps. Sorry, Andrew, please go.
No, it's all good. Yeah, like, you know, when I first heard the news, it was kind of frustrating because immediately I'm thinking, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is the beginning of, and we're going to hear more and more things roll out as the news progresses. I don't know if you guys, when you went to the Black Lives Matter rallies, we went to one here in Durham, and they kept yelling in Oshawa, and I kind of appreciated it because they were yelling, you know, Black Lives Matter. Then right after, Indigenous Lives Matter. And that was the whole chant for the whole protest was, you know, both of those together. Because we need to understand, yeah, you know, we have faced racism, but in Canada, you know, the Indigenous people have, you know, experienced many things. The other scary thing to think about is, you know, that school where they found 215 bodies, it closed in 1978.
Oh,
that was when I was born, which means the people who perpetrated those things, some of them are still alive.
Right.
So are those people going to be held to justice? And those are some of the questions that are going through my mind. And I'm thinking, like, what in the world? Like, what's going to take place? Because we have, you know, these children, we have missing Indigenous women, we have all these things that they've been talking about for years.
Right.
And the water supply and the rundown communities.
Water supply.
And the list goes on.
And I've been to some of these First Nations reserves, and just not being able to use the toilet, watch how we flush the toilet, watch how we drink the water, and you're thinking, how in the world are we doing this? And then people will say, well, they need to get over it. What? How do they get over something that has happened in 1978? The last school closed in 1996, and then you're asking people to. Yeah, I've heard
that though, Andrew. People are saying get over it. Like,
of course. Oh,
when I've heard many people, I've had many discussions with people talking about Indigenous rights and things, and people are like, oh, they get all this money, they get all these perks, they get all these things. They need to get over the things because they're getting all these tickets, you know, free tickets and free lunches and free money and free, you know, no taxes. And it's like, and it's like, are you kidding me? You can't ask for years, hundreds of years, for them to forget about it when you've created a cycle that they stay in that they can't get out.
It's crazy to think that, like in this province, the most, I've said this before, the most important, the richest province in this country, there are boil water advisories being issued for some First Nation reserves in the last 2 years. So we clearly, like I've said this before, the United States has a disgusting history when it comes to racism against Black people. But as Andrew just said,
oh my God,
ours is with the Indigenous communities of this country. Regardless of like how you feel about, you know, how we became Canada and who, whatever. Regardless of how you feel about that, we have to be able to look back and be like, we cannot look at, like Andrew said, we cannot look at the states and look down our nose at them because we think we're better. Anybody else? Your initial thoughts?
I was shocked. I mean, I was shocked just to hear exactly what happened. I've heard of things, similar events like that going on here, but just the number, and then just doing the research, and even the discussion that we had maybe about a half hour ago, hearing unfortunately that this is very similar to the Aborigines in Australia. How okay, so how the kids, because this whole system, I didn't understand how they were taking the children to be assimilated into European Western cultures. So then they would take them to the schools away from their parents. So now there's nobody watching them, nobody looking after them, and obviously contact must have been lost. So it's just I mean it's sad that that, and everyone's just given a timeline of 1996 and so forth, and it's like, wow, like something like this was happening here, and we're praying, but unfortunately it seems like that there might be some more, that this is, as you guys were saying, that unfortunately that we're probably going to have to look at a lot of these other schools and really see what went down.
And I would say one of the things that is probably the most jarring for myself, because when I found out, I would say it's one of those things that I wasn't necessarily shocked. It's on a level from the discussion going through school where they portrayed what residential schools were. There was a movie that was made that gets played on CBC every now and again that angles towards the sexual molestation of some Aboriginal children. It's like what I did is when I started reading up, it was more the nuance of it. That the whole process of when they were being taken away from their family, they were being moved to a school that was just far enough away that their family could not visit them. What they were doing is they were culturally, ethnically cleansing these children, because what ends up happening is their cultural upbringing, the thing that truthfully like defines who they are, their community, the way that they interact with the world around them. That itself is something that is considered problematic, and so we need to be able to remove them so that they themselves do not engage and they forget who they have been taught to be so far. And that itself was one of those things that always, even to this moment, like really unsettles me. Just with the whole evil, really, of what it is.
Yeah, it's been really hard to reconcile the thoughts of the institution that we represent, which is the church, and whatever denomination that we get to participate in sharing the hope that we have in them. I'm sure that we'll get into this a little later, but what do we need to speak to, or what changes do we need to present? What shifts do we need to make? Because this is our story too. This isn't just the nation of Canada. And I know a lot of people have been like, oh, well, that's the Catholic Church. And you're like, well, no, the Protestant Church was very involved in this as well. And I just, when I think about this last year, and I think about the megaphone and the microscopes that have been out on so many different social issues, it just hurts more and more. It doesn't hurt similar, it doesn't hurt the same, right? And I just recently posted something, a picture that I had seen where it's an Indigenous man holding a black man, and they're both naked in the midst of a fire, and one says it hurts and the other one says I know. And when we look at the world seemingly unraveling this year, at least in a North American context, and we do understand that there are other things happening in the world. We see what's happening in Palestine. When it's rooted in the religion and it's rooted in the hope of what we find ourselves and our livelihood attached to, I'm finding it really, 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 really difficult to imagine the conversations that need to be had going forward. And with, at the risk of rambling, I'm sure you guys have so many good points, and we can dive into this a little deeper. I just feel sad. I feel very broken. I feel very unsure. And you're kind of looking at the past saying, but it isn't really the past. It's very present.
You know, I think there's so many great points that you guys have said in terms of accountability as a nation and how we lack that. And I guess I'm prone to think of the individual in this and loss. And I think of how many, you know, one of you guys said, like, you know, do we go, I think it was Bart, you said, like, do we go and we dig up all the bones of all these, you know, all these children that were lost? And my inclination is like, hell yes. Like I think of all the families. I don't know about
100%,
but if you've ever had to like bury a loved one, you know what I mean? Like you want that closure, and you want to be able to shut that door. And you think of how many hundreds of families have not been able to shut the door on these atrocities. Like forget the reparations that are owed to you as a people and everything like that. You just want to bring closure, and you think of the indigenous cultures and the various, I guess, you know, their you know, beliefs and what they believe about life and death, and how important, you know, closure and death is in terms of how they process things and how they're able to move on. And there's so many families that even after death, even after all these atrocities, they're still not able to close the door. And I think like that for me is tragic. You know, like we've committed these acts, and we're, as a nation, you know, there's accountability to be had and all these kinds of things. But even still, even after all these schools are closed and everything like that, they're still not able to shut the door on the lost loved one. And that for me is tragic.
Here in the chat, thanks so much for all of you who are watching live and leaving comments in our chat here on YouTube. Remember, you can always email us afterwards at thehouseofcommon@gmail.com if you have any comments or thoughts. We might read them live on our podcast YouTube show later on, but this is what's happening in our YouTube chat right now. Our friend Zach Baker says this: news came out, saddened. It has seeped into conversation over the weekend. Compared notes with friends as to how little residential schools were mentioned in our history classes, and I have to agree with that. These were things that, like, if you weren't watching one of those commercials, you know, the Heritage commercials on TV, if you didn't see that, you really did not know
Heritage
history.
moments.
Heritage moments. You didn't really know about any of this stuff. Brandon Wells, we still have Indigenous communities that are run down, ignored, even right here in Ontario. I know of an area that is still under water advisory warnings from years ago. Another comment, our buddy Niels, you know the vibes, you already know what it is. Missing and murdered children are happening in numbers every day. When will those involved in this evil be held accountable? That is the real pandemic. There's a lot to parse through in that that comment there. Production management. We haven't uncovered a dark history. We have a dark history in Canada that needs to be reconciled. We must stop saying that things like "thank God we're not in the USA." This week has shown our ugly. Stefan, back to you.
Yep, and that's very true. Murray St. Clair, former senator, I believe he was also the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, is actually pushing for Canada and going for I don't know, coroners offices and things like that in every location where there was a residential school to potentially discover sites that are similar to what we see in Kamloops. So someone said it, and you know, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this is not the last time we read a headline that says, you know, bodies found at former residential school. I don't think. I think this is very tiny in comparison to what could eventually be a very large number. And I don't say that, you know, trying to be prophetic or anything like that, but I just that's one school, 215.
Yeah.
And you think about how many were across the country up until 1996. Man,
horrible.
Yeah, so NBC News, and when the States is covering us, we got major problems.
It's in the States.
But they're talking about how there was over 150,000 kids put into these schools across the nation, and they're looking at roughly about 6,000 that died. So more bodies are going to be dug up. But someone said we have a dark past, but this shows we also have a dark present.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's that is oh boy, it's gruesome. And so Calvin mentioned this a bit earlier. So maybe this might be an interesting conversation piece to have on this topic. But we're all involved in the church in some form or way, or have been involved in the church some form or way. And on social media, a lot of people and pastors and leaders in churches posting and doing what doesn't sound bad, but doing what we seem to do now on the regular when something like this breaks, right? Whenever there's an injustice somewhere, everybody posts. My question to you, wise gentlemen, is how does the church respond to this, and how can the church move forward? What role does the church play in this, if any? And I'll preface this by saying the Catholic Church has yet to say anything on this discovery. And a lot of the residential schools were run first by the Catholic Church and then taken over by the government, I believe in partnership with the Catholic Church, and not to paint the Catholics, because as Cal said, Protestants were just as big a part of it as well. Whether we were in the school or not, a big part of it as well. Christianity is Christianity. And so I just want to make it clear, Catholic Church hasn't said anything yet. News might drop. But what role does the church play in this, and what can we do in the future?
Yeah, I think this is in many ways very similar to the racism talks that we've had for the past however long.
Since we started.
Since we started, the inceptions. Same thing with the speaking out against misconduct in Christian leaders. You got to come forward, man. I think we got to lead the charge, especially to the religious aspect. Catholic, Protestant, doesn't matter. There is an aspect where the name of religion was used to massacre children, to rob families of their culture, their heritage, their language, their belief systems, their land, their clothing, their identity, their names. That's everything, The same way we say a church is not a building, it is the people. Indigenous people are not just the humans, it's the story and the language and the heritage. And if the religious organizations and leaders of that time were in partnership or a congruent thought with the government to strip all of these identifying things away from these people, I think we got to be on the forefront of at least acknowledging that it's happened, be willing to listen, be willing to be part of conversations. We already had it at the church that I attend to, scheduled, I know in the summertime, a First Nation and Indigenous month in this summer. But I think I'm not in those meetings that plans these type of things for the weekend. But I think that's drastically going to change, the topic about just awareness to now maybe something more, at least I would hope so at my church, that they would do something not just, hey, let's keep this in the top of our mind. Let's be aware. And I'm very fortunate. I have a leader who's very passionate about Indigenous First Nation issues. But I would hope that this changes the narrative of how we plan these services and how we have more casual conversations to talk about things openly. And just as a Black person who also quasi works in a church. Black people, we're here for indigenous people, for indigenous rights. They have that sentiment of it hurts, I know, is the same thing. We understand this idea, this notion, this history of culture, name, religion, people's gone missing and stolen. We understand this, and we stand in with our indigenous and aboriginal brothers and sisters, and for all the things that are atrocities that are happening. I want to speak foremost before anybody here and say, as the group of House of Commons, those that are here are not even present, that we're sorry that this has happened. We're sorry that these atrocities have taken place, and that we have, as a people of Canada, stood by and allowed these things to happen. We've stood by and understood that these concepts, these ideas have happened, and not gone looking for our lost brothers and sisters. I think the church needs to step up. I know we say it a lot when it comes to morality, when it comes to race, but even here with indigenous issues, we got to step it up, man. We got to step it up.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we often do is we saw this, guys. We talked about this. Cal used to say this during the midst of the protests and rallies this summer. Fight the fatigue. Right? We talk, we post, we put a black square, we share that we're reading Ta-Nehisi Coates, we share this, and then we move on to whatever the next thing is. And then we really don't acknowledge things that are happening in and around us. We post it and then we move on. And I think something that we have to be willing to do is apologize until someone says to stop apologizing. So it's not just being able to say, yeah, we're sorry. But until that person says, I forgive you, we keep on saying sorry. We keep on apologizing. That the church should be the first one to live lives of repentance. If we're going to do that in terms of the response, it has to be more than just a post. It has to be.
Right.
And that's exhausting. And I know if any of us have hurt our spouse, we want to be able to say, I'm sorry, and then be done with it. Like we're forgiven. But that's often not the case. Often it takes a lot more time to kind of like build trust and to build that home back up all over again. So I would say that we need to be more than just accountable. We need to be regularly accountable all the time, and not just when it's convenient in the moment. It needs to be something that we're doing 6 months from now, a year from now, constantly leading the charge in saying we are sorry as people, because this was done in like slavery was done in the name of God and the church. This was done in the name of God and church to make people more like a European culture. And if they decide to run away, if they decide to do something else, they decide to defend themselves, they were killed and then they were hidden. So we have to be willing to be constantly repenting and verbalizing.
I think we lose Chase?
We lost Chase?
Yeah, we lost him.
He was on fire there.
He was rolling too.
He was rocking. All right, well, let's if Chase comes back on, we'll jump in. Cal, what do you got?
Yeah, there's a famous reggae lyric, and obviously the word action means something different in that song, but it goes, action, not a bag of mouth. Like we are talking heads. We are all communicators in our spaces. And there's an element of like, I don't think we can talk ourselves out of this one. I don't think we can keep talking about things. I think that there's a serious movement that needs to occur. And again, that's very easy to say sitting in my studio and talking to you guys. But action, not a bag of mouth. And I think that this kind of goes back to a conversation that we recently had about justice and mercy and goodness and kindness. showing it to the world in a way that doesn't require um, conversion. And I think that this is the problem. The only way to really deal with the issue that we see at hand, this is the evidence. This is the unraveling. We're witnessing the sin get uncovered over the course of many, 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 many years in the name of the institution that we represent. I actually think that the only way to remedy this is not an orange square. It is not more awareness. There's definitely more listening that needs to be had. There's definitely less talking that needs to be had. And I think we need to go into these areas with these people and listen to what it is that they want, what it is that they need. And as a church, practically not undo, but practically work towards a reconciliation that is very practical, that is very tangible, and is not hinged to, but you must change. You must be like us. You must adopt our custom. You must adopt our faith. How is it? And it's been mentioned, no running water, no electricity, like no real resource. You're living in food deserts. We have forgotten you. We took everything that we had, we pillaged what you had, and we built on top of what we wanted and told you can take care of yourself on what you have left over. I actually just think that we have to go in, we have to assist in what it is that they are wanting and what they are looking for. And if they don't want it from us, they don't want us to walk and be hands and feet, then I think that we need to become allies and we need to become resources in spaces that they're not as privileged as we are to be in.
And I totally agree with you. I don't know why this is echoing. But my question is, do we need to do more? Because this is systemic. Like, this is all through government. And so how do we change that? So, for example, my dad, he worked for a place called Frontiers Foundation, which was project development for First Nations. And then my sister, years later, she worked for a place in Montreal that it was a government-funded place that would help people, once they came to Montreal, get off the streets. Because if they were still on the streets within a week, they would get into prostitution and drugs and all the other stuff. And it was just specifically for First Nations people. So this is something that's systemic all through our system. And so the system almost needs to be broken, like we've talked about for so many other things.
Right.
But how do we break that system? Because in order to break that system, you need to crush it down from the top.
Yeah.
Because we've heard Trudeau and different prime ministers, not just Trudeau, but other prime ministers talk about how we want to get to the bottom of this, how we want reconciliation. And as we see, nothing is really taking place.
Yeah, I think that it's the action piece. I believe that we need to educate people, we need to release people, empower people, resource people who can go into the spaces that can make policy changes and who can make better educational, movements. But I actually think practically, like, however long that takes to go through courts, are there wells that we can go and, dig up? Are there buildings that we can build? What are the very practical things that give people an enriched life on a daily basis? You know what I mean? That actually remedy issues that are in front of them. I think we have this prerogative as believers. I was talking with my coworkers earlier that we feel like we have to atone for our sins of the past. Like, we didn't do it, but what we represent did. And I don't know if that's what they're asking for. I think that there's a better way moving forward.
Yeah, no, yeah. I hear that. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, Cal, because I think everybody was talking about what the church should do at like such a high level, and you're right. Like, what are we doing at the ground level? And I think, for some of us who know people who are indigenous here, that we have those type of relationships that we've already kind of made. That it's really good to just kind of see how they're doing. Because who knows? I mean, maybe some of the friends and some of the people that you might know who might be indigenous, like they might have had, a long lost relative who has been missing, and unfortunately who has been in this type of situation, who has passed. So I think it's us just being around them, being friendly, being supportive, being able to help out, because that's essentially what the church is about. You know, I've always told people, even in my church to this day, like our job is to be a blessing to people. Our job is to support people, even though they might not have the same belief systems in me. Our job isn't to necessarily change people's characters, but to allow God and the Holy Spirit to change people's hearts. And so, with that, you know, with the acts of kindness, that's the best way that I see that we can really be the church, show love, and and be right there for people who are in a time of hurting right now.
With myself this past week, I stepped into the wasteland that is Facebook, and I'm a part of a group of people that are predominantly WASPs. For those of you that don't know what that means, it's white, Anglo-Saxon, and Protestant. And what ended up
and
happening
like
was,
ultra rich as well. Wasp is rich. Yeah.
Yeah. And so one of the people in the group, he pastors a church up north. And so he was asking this group, how do I respond to all the news that is going on when he goes, I have people in my church that are of First Nation, and it's like, I need to know how I need to respond. And the first thing that I came to realize was, I'm like, why are you asking us?
That's
It's
a good
like,
question.
this is the whole problem, because we are finding ourselves in the same situation. It's an endless cycle, and I know it's something that Calvin spoke to. So if you're watching this again, go back and watch Calvin's points again, because it is worth the rewatch. But my response to him was, it's like, you have people within your congregation. Why don't you ask them, how can we respond? Because what ends up happening is, did we ever think that the reason that we find ourselves in these situations again is because all we're doing is, okay, you have this problem, we're just going to throw money at it, because that's how we do things in the Western society, is we throw money at it. But what we're finding ourselves right now in this moment is we are living through the the symptom of the problem, where we have been dealing with people that have had their, or attempted to have their cultures erased from them. It's something where it's like, you've taken someone and ethnically, culturally, you try to scrub them clean, and they go, hey, you're good, we've made you new. And it's one of those things that I was reading an article, and someone that was part of First Nation, that I'll put it in the chat because I cannot do justice to the name of the First Nations. He himself said this in reference to conversation. He goes, my creator is asking their God, small g, why their disciples would do this to us. The Pope, in reference to the Catholic Church, must answer this question. There is no more denying it. Now there is physical evidence from these unmarked graves. And it's something that we like to put forward, this whole reality that within our faith, that our God, who Scripture refers to with a capital G, that he loves you the way that you are. You are made in his image. And what we unfortunately have the baggage of dealing with, and it's that tension of, what do we do to make up for the ills of those that went before us, is we're telling them that they're not good enough, that they're broken, that there is something that is not working. And what we end up happening is, they're failing by our own commentary, by the way that we're trying to get them to live. Maybe we should sit down at the table and listen to them and go, okay, so how can we work with you? How can we empower you? because at the end of the day, it's something that we're doing such a great job trying to fix their problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I really liked one of the things that Calvin said is that we're Calvin, you talked about listening, and I think that like their community leaders, Indigenous people community leaders, have been asking for things for generations, and much like the Catholic Church, we want to say everything but not bend on an apology. And we won't bend on the things that they're actually asking for, and most of the time it's just their land back. And so if you think about solutions, like I know it's a big ask, it's a big ask, but if you want to talk about how does the church respond as best as we can, give them the things that they're asking for, give them back the things that they're asking for. And I don't you know what I mean? Like, I think I can sit here and say that and be like, wow, like, yeah, that sounds all well and great. But if we really actually, if we're committed to this, you know what I mean? It's all well and good to sit here on the chat and to talk about these things and whatnot. And then we go about our lives and our spaces that are, that we're benefiting from. But the reality is that, like, I think the thing that they're asking for is actually the way back, in a lot of ways. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that, listen, if you're a pastor, you're watching this, or maybe you're on staff somewhere, Tim has given you the best advice. Find someone who is of Indigenous descent and sit down and listen to them. The church, we're always trying to come up with solutions, and I don't think we do enough listening. And for some strange reason, we're okay with sending people halfway across the country to help them and build schools and build stuff over there for 2 or 3 weeks, take a picture, have beach day, and come back. But we're not willing to send people 9 hours up north to help them. And I think that we have to figure out a way to evangelize and, not even evangelize, just right some of the wrongs that have been done in the name of Christianity, in the name of bad theology, in the name of bad teaching. We need to be doing. This is not going to be the first. I'm very confident saying that. This isn't the first, and it won't be the last, sorry. And so if we want to actually be a part of the reconciliation process, we need to start hearing and listening to what people are saying and hearing the hearts, not the words, the hearts that are behind what is being said. There are people that have lost a lot in the name of God, wrongfully in the name of God. And so what can we do today is listen to them and hear them and not try to erase who they are, but embrace who they are and see them the way that Jesus sees them. Chase, what do we got in the chat?
Neil says this: there were those who knew of the evil going on in the residential schools. Sadly, when they tried to talk about it, they were called paranoid conspiracy theorists, as they had no power to stop it. So is the church willing to dig deep and unpack the evil of what has taken place? Not just say, yeah, we had our conversation, check in the box, but to really get our hands dirty. Homie Nelly, a fan of the show, clean water is a start. Michelle says this: love your neighbor as yourself. Zach, if we can put oil in the pipeline across the continent, then we can get water to the whole continent. And Kamoy says this. We'll conclude off of this. So many thoughts here, but I just want to point out that we often point fingers at the government, which we should in a way. Accountability is important, but the reality is we vote. And I promise you that many people don't have reconciliation as a high priority when they're thinking about who we are electing and what they are doing for these communities. So there's a lot here in the chat. Thank you so much for participating with us. This show does not function without you, the audience, you, the listener, feeding information, feeding thoughts back to us so that we can relay it back to you and feed it back and relay it back to those who listen later on. And this is, we don't shy away from tough conversations. You know that about us. You know that about the squad. We have tough conversations. We're willing to have them. And we're willing to have them a lot of times because other people aren't willing to have them out loud. It's something that happens on a Facebook page, and then they leave it alone. But we're willing to have those tough conversations, and we're so happy that you're willing to have these tough conversations with us. Timothy, are you wanting to say something before we go?
That itself is a fitting end. There's nothing that I can add to that does it any justice.
And yet I passed it on to Tim because I read in the chat, shall I end?
Can we just pause for a second for the fact that Tim said that he didn't want to say anything while saying something.
Yeah, he said, "Coach, pass me the ball. I don't want to shoot it."
Right. So Kobe, take it up. There you go.
Oh man.
Oh, thanks for that, Tim. Thanks. I literally was like landing the plane. I was like, no, we gotta go back up for a second. No, we're going back down again. Ladies and gentlemen, be here with us. There's an echo happening. Not sure where the echo's coming from, but that's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, be here with us next week, Tuesday, 10 o'clock. Tell your friends. Tell your friends. Make sure to let them know. Someone needs to mute something because I don't know where this echo's coming from. I'm going to keep on talking. There we go. It's gone. There we go. Perfect. Tell your friends. Make sure to let them know what we're doing. All that good stuff. It's always fun. This is ridiculous. We have this really strong, deep segment, and then it goes all out the window because of an echoing microphone. We are professionals. We do promise that for sure. Be with us next week, 10 o'clock on YouTube, or any time through clips and segments on YouTube throughout the week, or anytime you download the podcast on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure, again, email us your thoughts, comments at thehouseofcommonshow@gmail.com, or get in the DMs at the House of Common on Instagram, House of Common on Twitter, or House of Common on Facebook. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the House of Common Show, the flagship show, I say, of the House of Common Network. You know the vibes. We'll see you next week.